I know this is a topic that can be a little bit weird or maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but hopefully we can dispel that over the next 30 minutes or so. So first off, I want to give a brief introduction on who I am. So I'm Matt Schembari. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Lightforge Games. We're a new video game startup, about 3 years old now, and we've been following open salaries since the very beginning. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years at Blizzard as a programmer working on StarCraft 2 and Heroes of the Storm. And then I switched over to Epic, where I ultimately became the director of UI on Fortnite. And in early 2020, right before the pandemic, I left Epic and co-founded Lightforge Games with a couple other folks. And here we are today. So why are we here today? Well, first off, the goal here is not to convince you all to go home and enact open salary right away, right? Really today is about planting a seed, right? I know when I was first introduced to this idea, I thought it was absolutely bonkers and thought that there's probably all sorts of unintended side effects and downsides and things like that. But after 3 years of open salaries and reaching almost 40 employees, I can unequivocally say that for us at Lightforge, it's been a really big success. So the actual goal today is to provide you all with the information you need to start your journey on open salaries. And we're going to do that in 3 ways. First, I'm going to provide the initial thought process that we went through for why we enacted open salaries and some of the supporting research behind it. I'll also provide a logistical blueprint for implementation, basically how we do it. And finally, I'll provide a bunch of the benefits and challenges that we've all learned on our journey over the last couple of years, with maybe a little touch of soapboxing periodically, because let's be honest, we can all do better, right? All right, so in order to really begin, we need to have a shared definition on what open salary is. So open salary is a policy where management publishes full compensation information for all employees to all employees. And that includes the names, titles, levels, and any other contributing factors that go into it. And this is specific actual hard numbers too, not ranges. And this is all forms of compensation, including, yes, bonuses and equity as well. So essentially, this is your HR nightmare scenario where someone takes all of payroll and emails it to the entire company, and it's doing it intentionally. So why on earth would anyone do that? Let's go on that journey. So when we first formed Lightforge Games, we were, like a lot of startups, we wanted to be a really values-driven organization, right? And so in our very first meeting of co-founders, we talked about things like core values and who did we want to be when we grew up? And so that led us to the question of, what does a workplace look like in the year 2025, 2030, 2040, right? What can we do differently as a company born in the year 2020? And so if a company is really nothing more than a group of people on the same mission, we looked at the people, right? And it's a really easy projection to make when you're looking through the generational lens, which broad strokes, I know. But already today, millennials are over 40. Hell, I'm a millennial and I turned 40 in May. So this means people with 10 to 20 years experience are typically made up of people in the millennial generation today. And that's your leads and your directors and people starting companies. Also, Gen Z has graduated. The upper range of Gen Z is 26 years old. That means that pretty soon they're going to be seniors. They're going to be leading departments at big companies very soon. And these aren't small generations either. These 2 generations combined equal 46% of the full-time workforce in the United States. And this is the general workforce. We have reason to believe that the video game industry probably skews younger. So why is this all important? It's important because researchers commonly use the generational lens when trying to find what trends to expect. And one of the biggest workplace trends is that younger workers are placing a strong emphasis on corporate responsibility and transparency. In a study by Gallup in 2021, they wanted to find the answer to the question, what are employees looking for in their employer? And millennials and Gen Z together had the exact same response for number 1. They want an organization who cares about their employees' well-being, right? That's the number 1 concern that they have. By the way, that's not just for young people. Gen X and baby boomers have that as a top 3 concern as well. Number 2 between millennials and Gen Z is also shared. The organization's leadership is ethical. The only difference really is at number 3, where older millennials, those born before 1988, want an organization whose leadership is open and transparent, and younger millennials and Gen Z want an organization that is diverse and inclusive of all people as their number 3 concern. So put this all together, Half of employees expect a diverse workforce with ethical, transparent leaders that care about their well-being. Gallup goes on to make a recommendation in this study based on this information. They write, if your organization has not addressed the above items, well-being, ethical and transparent leadership, and diversity, equity, inclusion recently, it's time to start having those conversations with your leadership team. These aren't just topics for young people. And this all combines with the deep distrust younger people have in institutions, right? Especially financial institutions like housing, education, healthcare, and employment. In a Washington Post article titled, "There's Still a Taboo on Discussing Salaries, but Millennials Are Breaking It," Jake Rosenfeld, professor of sociology at Washington University and author of You're Paid What You're Worth and Other Myths, which I love that title, he writes, the oldest millennials began their careers too late to enjoy the late 1990s economic expansion, and instead saw their incomes fall during the lost decade of the aughts. Quick side note, that happened to me at that same time. While I was at Blizzard, I saw my final take-home drop 3 years in a row, and I was promoted one of those years. The youngest, meanwhile, finished schooling and embarked on careers during the onset of the Great Recession, with many struggling to gain a firm grip on a middle-class lifestyle during the uneven and prolonged recovery. Where else do you see this? Social media. The anti-work and work reform subreddits hit the front page of Reddit every single day. These are the discussions that young people are having. These are our memes. I think I can still say we, right? The great resignation and quiet quitting are also showing that people are making employment decisions based on this distrust. So as employers, it's really important for us to recognize that this is the environment that we're operating within. We can wring our hands or yell at clouds all that we want, but it'd be foolish to ignore the lived experiences of half the workforce. So remember how Gen Z and millennials place DE&I as their number 3 at job expectation? Well, it turns out that open salary is highly related to equitability in the workplace. In a New York Times article titled, "Want to Close the Pay Gap? Pay Transparency Will Help," which is a pretty on-the-nose title, Morella Hernandez, associate professor at the Darden School of Business, writes, by keeping compensation secret, we might obscure structural inequalities and enable inequalities to persist. She goes on to write that even well-meaning employers can hide structural inequalities even from themselves. So essentially, when your company's policy is that of pay secrecy rather than pay transparency, neither the employees nor management have the full information to fight structural inequalities. PayScale took this a step further, and they compared the actual pay to transparency levels across 1.6 million people. And as you can see from the bar graph here, there's a clear correlation between pay transparency and pay equity. In fact, in the same study, they concluded that transparent pay policies completely close the gender wage gap. In a New York Daily News opinion piece titled "Pay Equity Begins with Pay Transparency," Beverly Cooper Neufeld, president of Powher New York, and Sayar Khawaja, senior attorney at Legal Momentum, write, with salary ranges out in the open, employers must think critically about how they set pay at the front end of the process before they insert unconscious biases. Remember that. We're going to come back to that quote in a minute, right? Employers must think critically about how they set pay at the front end of the process. At the same time, women and people of color have more leverage to advocate for themselves and more information to make better decisions about jobs and industries to pursue, helping to combat occupational segregation. In short, this is the most effective tool that we know of to fight wage gaps. So for my first Soapbox challenge, if you say you're committed to creating a fair and equitable workplace for all, why wouldn't you use the most effective tool we have available? And so given all these trends and expectations, right, it's bound to arrive at some point, right? Well, as you can see from the spoiler title there, it's already here. It's been a lot written in the US press about how New York City, California, and Washington State now have laws where all job postings must contain salary ranges. So in case you weren't aware, if you operate in any of those regions and you post a job posting, you need to have actual pay ranges in your job posting. And not these bullshit like $50,000 to $2 million ranges either, like real actual salary ranges. In August of last year, the European Union's Pay Transparency Act went into effect, putting the same requirement for all companies within the European Union. Across industry, it's a growing trend as well. Whole Foods has been famously open salary since 1986, and they managed to maintain it through their acquisition with Amazon. Even Starbucks, they have paid transparency as part of their stated commitment to pay equity. And the social media firm Buffer, they're really vocal online about their pay transparency policies. They've got a ton of information online about like practical kickstarts, the research they've done, all this kind of stuff. In fact, that's where we got a lot of our information and inspiration from as well. And more importantly, in video games, it's already here as well. Last year in an article in Bloomberg, Jason Schreier wrote about how we at Lightforge, along with the studio's Gardens and Disbelief, are all following radical pay transparency policies. In fact, last year I was at a conference in September, and we realized that the people sitting at the table represented 7 video game startups, 4 of which had some form of open salary going on. So the main message here is pay transparency is here, and the momentum is only growing. So for my next Soapbox challenge, given how much employees are demanding this, are you prepared to compete with companies who are practicing open salaries? All right, so that's the case for the why. What about the how? Well, the how is actually really easy, right? All you have to do is open up that salary spreadsheet you already have. I know you have one, right? So all you do is just open up read access. Here's how we do it. So at Lightforge, every employee has read access to our salary spreadsheet. And this is the actual sheet, right? There's no other source of truth, right? It's not like there's a secret one for management that we get to see too, right? Like this is the one sheet to rule them all. And we make sure it's clearly accessible in Notion, right? This isn't something we have to jump through hoops or ask for permission to see, like, right? It's a big link right there in the front page of the HR section in Notion. We also make it a part of orientation as well. So in that same checklist that's like download this piece of software, install this thing, whatever, one of the items is here's the salary sheet, day 1, go look at it, it's right there, bookmark it, whatever you want to do. And this is what they see, right? So I'm using made up data here, which I get the irony on, but some companies choose to publish their full salary information publicly. We've chosen not to do that because sadly, we're in an industry with a history of harassment. However, this is the exact same format of information that people would see, right? And so of course you've got your basic information like name, title, and start date. You've also got your base salary as well. The base salary there, if you look to the right now, role, family, job level, and step, those are what feed into what someone's base salary is. We then have a column for any adjustments that we might apply to someone's salary. And then the final salary. And that bolded column there, that's important. That's the actual final salary. That's the same number we put into the payroll system. And then right next to that too, the stock incentive plan equity, that is the actual number of shares as well. Because again, if equity is a form of compensation, share that as well. So remember that quote I mentioned a little bit ago about how pay transparency forces companies to think about pay at the front end of the process? Well, we learned that lesson really quickly. So we always started as open salary company, but we didn't have a standardized pay system at first. And so what that meant was that for the first year, as we were constructing offers, we had to kind of ad hoc put together an offer that we thought was fair based on someone's experience level or market rates or things like that. And we learned really quickly that's really hard to do. First off, it's inefficient. It's also really hard to do in front of an audience. So what did we do? We copied from Buffer. It's cool, they encourage it. So what they have is they've got a full system for a role family, which is something like programmer, designer, et cetera. Level, which is junior, mid-level, senior, and then step. Step is basically a more granular form of level that helps kind of allow people to still go up in their career in more granular steps. And at each of those steps, we list out the specific job expectations and what the responsibilities are for each of those, and importantly, what the salary is. And so what that ultimately is, it's a rubric of job expectations with the actual salary information associated with it. And so so that means that conversations for hiring and promotions and things like that can be done entirely around level and not around pay. So it's not like someone's better at negotiating or someone asks for more. It's all around what are the job expectations? Are they meeting the job expectations? Do we expect that they would or not, right? And this last point is important too, that the standardization system isn't about flattening pay, right? We don't have flat pay. We've got a 3.1x from our lowest paid employee to our highest paid employee, right? It's about having clear expectations and clarity around what how those salaries are calculated. And so it's really important for us that people can look at the job expectations, understand what that is, and then understand what the pay is for each of those steps. All right, so let's talk about some of the pros and cons. So first off, we've noticed that we've had a massive boon in recruiting thanks to our open salary policy. We were recently told by our external recruiter, LFM Talent, that we smashed one of their records for interested rate. So interested rate is essentially when they send out a bunch of cold emails, how many people write back that they're interested in learning more, right? Typically for a company like us, kind of an unknown company, and a role like this, the game designer, we would expect to see a 5% interested rate. What we got instead was a 28% interested rate, like nearly 6x increase on top of what they would expect. And what we found out when we had follow-up conversations with folks was that our open salary policy and our values were nearly universally stated as why they wanted to learn more. And this continues through to hiring as well. Nearly everybody states during orientation, when we talk about open salary, they stop me and they say, by the way, the open salary policy was one of the major contributing factors for why I accepted the position in the first place. And this builds trust immediately in the process as well. We've got it all over our website and always in the first screen when recruiting, we always talk about our open salary policy and how it works because it's a little bit weird. We want people to feel comfortable with it. And commonly we hear from folks from marginalized backgrounds that they express relief and gratitude that this is what the policy is. And so we believe this has also led to a higher rate of women applying, fighting that old meme of we'd love to hire more X, but they're just not applying. And we know that's the case because in our diversity and hiring report last year, we found that 42% of all applicants identified as women, transgendered, non-binary, or other. So bottom line is we're getting a larger, more trusting, and more diverse hiring pool thanks to our open salary policy. But what about the highest paid employees, right? A common skepticism I hear when chatting with folks is, oh yeah, I'm sure this is great, but the highest paid employees, maybe you're gonna have trouble with them because their salaries are gonna be depressed, or maybe it'll make others feel bad if they can see their salaries, or maybe they won't want to share. They'll be embarrassed. They don't want to share that they're paid so highly. Well, in our experience so far, this hasn't been the case. First off, I've already talked about salary. We don't depress salaries, right? We just justify why someone's making a particular amount. And we're okay with the fact that there's market rate information, that experience is a factor, things like that. In terms of others feeling bad, again, this hasn't been the case for us either. When I talk to folks that are more junior about their feelings around the open salary policy, what we typically hear is appreciation that they have clarity in what their career path is, right? They can look at the different job expectations, understand what the responsibilities are, and then see what the compensation is associated with it. They can even see other people to kind of get a bit of a grounding of, oh, that's what it means to be a senior or whatever it is, right? And I know when I started my career, that was always a black box to me. I had no idea what it meant to be promoted. It's just like do more, better, I guess, right? And then when you do get that promotion and you get that number going up, like you have no idea, was that a good amount? Was that a really good amount? Are they super happy with me? Well, was it a bad amount? No idea, right? It's a complete black box. So they express gratitude in having that clarity in what that career path looks like. And then finally, in terms of not wanting to share, again, we haven't seen that. When I talk to folks at the higher end of the salary range, what I hear instead is that they really appreciate being a part of the solution. Like they want to be a part of a more equitable company, and so they're happy to do that. And I get it. We're going to have a self-selection bias. Our website's all like empathy and rainbows, and certainly we're searching for people who are values aligned with us. But remember, corporate responsibility, caring for employees, ethical leadership, and transparency are top expectations for all people, not just the beneficiaries of any given policy. We've also seen a huge benefit on accountability as well. So employees look out for each other, not just for themselves. And this gives us higher confidence in the decisions that we're making and how we're making it. In fact, we had an employee once identify a clerical issue in their own compensation, and they wouldn't have been able to do it by the nature of this error without being able to compare it to others. And so what could have been like a real nightmare to roll back and a complete breakdown in trust ended up being a celebration of our policies and an increasing in trust. And so we expect to have these open conversations. In fact, we charge the team with having these open conversations. During orientation, when we get to the section of open salary, I always say to everyone, look, along with our open salary policy, all we're asking for is that if you have any concerns about your compensation or anyone else's, we just have an open conversation about it. And this really helps fight those narratives and conjecture that are only natural. It's human nature to look around and wonder what your neighbor's getting and make up stories and these kinds of things. And so what we find is with our open salary policy, people have the information they need to not fill in the gaps with made up information. So for my next Soapbox challenge, if you believe that you're making good choices on compensation, why wouldn't you want to combat conjecture and made up narratives with actual facts? So let's talk about the challenges. So the first challenge is hard conversations. It is without question that open salary definitely forces you to have more hard conversations. In particular, we sometimes have to have these really awkward comparative conversations with people in the room, right? So we're having a hiring discussion, which we actually do open door, so anyone logged into our virtual office can listen in as well. But sometimes we have to say something like, hey, you person in the room, do you think this person is a higher level or lower level than you? And then, of course, it's really just a proxy for, do you think this person should make more money or less money than you, right? But these are important conversations to have to ensure that we are being fair. And so I get it that there's these culturally baked in hangups around talking about compensation, but we try to normalize it as much as possible by just having the conversations more often and just talking it out. Finally, the other thing that's really hard with conversations is this idea of negotiation versus job level, right? I mentioned before about how our job level system meant that we could talk about things like job expectations and responsibilities and things like that. But the honest truth is it's really hard to objectively know if someone's like a 3.2 or a 3.3 just from a couple hours of interview in a way that makes it feel really good that, oh yeah, we're definitely 100% objective. And I think if we're really, really honest with ourselves, there's been a couple conversations that we really were probably having a negotiation conversation and just using job level as a proxy to that. But the only solace that we do have is that because we do have to justify and share the reasoning with the entire team, and because they will see the results, it sets a certain bar that we still have to meet, even if we really want to land a candidate, and the confidence and the accountability that if we do get something wrong, the team will let us know about it. But isn't that the point, right? The whole point of open salary, the whole point of this is to have hard conversations. And if you're not having hard conversations around compensation and level, and if you're not fully justifying and defending your decisions, what are you even doing? And lastly, I want to talk about the challenge of transition, right? So we've been open salary from the very beginning, and I definitely 100% acknowledge how hard it would be to transition a company from pay secrecy to pay transparency, right? And the honest truth is I have zero experience doing it. But what I can offer you being on the other side of the fence here is this thought exercise, right? So imagine that HR nightmare scenario, right? Imagine someone leaks all of payroll to your entire company. What scares you about that? Is it some unfair pay? Someone getting paid more or less than they should be getting paid? Is it an underpaid high performer that you've got someone who's really, really awesome who's just not asking for more? Are you afraid of maybe, despite your best effort, there might actually be some accidental inequities in there that someone, once they can run some numbers, run some math against the numbers, that might expose that? Well, why aren't you doing something about it? If you currently have compensation issues that you wouldn't want people to know, why aren't you fixing those issues now? They're not as secret as you think. People talk, right? So fix those issues now. All right, so let's talk about next steps, right? Let's say you listen to this talk and you're all in, you totally believe me, you got to do open salary, right? What should you do? Well, if you're a decision maker, start with some further reading. Go to Buffer. Buffer's website has a ton of information, right? There's a practical kickstart, the research of them doing it over the last 7 or 8 years, and that job expectation matrix that I mentioned before. A ton of information on there. Start there. Also, reach out to me. I'm going to be in the Overlook area after this. I'm happy to take more questions and talk through concerns people have, things like that. But also find me on LinkedIn and like reach out to me. Seriously, I view this as an important mission for the industry, and I'm really happy to take time to answer questions and talk through people's concerns. And finally, think of this like a journey, right? I would never recommend that someone comes to a 30-minute talk and goes home and flips a switch on something like this, right? It's way too important. So think of it like a journey, take baby steps. So, learn, talk, reflect, share, post salary ranges. You probably have to anyway, right? Run that thought exercise that we just did before. Run it in a serious way. Find those things that scare you and then fix them. And slowly expand access as well, right? Right now it's probably just HR and upper management that has access to this, but what if all your directors had access? What if all your leads had access, right? Slowly expand that access until everyone has access. And if you're a team member, what can you do? Well, start by educating yourself, your peers, HR, CEO, anyone else who has that you have access to. Connect this to your company's DE&I efforts. Hold them accountable for the nice words they have on their website. And if your company has ERGs, I bet they'd be real interested in anything that would help fight the wage gaps. Maybe a bit spicier? Learn your rights. So I am not a lawyer. Do not get legal advice from video game programmers. But Under the National Labor Relations Act, employees have the right to communicate with other employees at their workplace about their wages. I pulled that quote from their website, so I didn't get it wrong. So that's how it works, right? So review your rights, talk to a lawyer if necessary, but start a conversation, right? Make both the ethical and the business cases for open salary. I genuinely believe that this is something that's better for both the employees and the employers at the same time, so make it happen. All right, so that's end of my talk here. That's all the time I've got. But thank you so much for coming to this. Thank you. And yeah, in case you couldn't tell, I genuinely believe that open salaries are a key ingredient to creating a more fair and equitable workplace in our industry. So I'm super glad to be able to share this. We've got a few more minutes, so if people did want to line up for questions, we've got some mics on either side there.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Sure.
And it's a two-part question.
Sure.
So the first part is, how do you address independent contractors and freelancers and adjust for regional differences?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part is, in the presentation, you mentioned that you don't post this publicly because of harassment. Can you clarify that further?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So we're a small company, right? And so there's 38 employees right now. If we were to post everyone's name and salary online, which is what some companies do, the fear is that in the video game industry, that would attract some unwanted attention and things like that to our employees. And we felt that that was going too far in kind of violating or exposing their privacy. And so we view this as a company secret. We get to know about it, but not outside folks. In terms of contractors and things like that, for the companies that we have that are company contractors, we typically we're pretty open in general. So folks do have access to seeing how much we're paying for various contractors. For independent contractors, we probably have that information. We just don't really expose it all that much. Like people can probably find it if they wanted to, but we don't make a big deal about that. They're not employees. I don't really want to necessarily put them under the same, like they didn't necessarily agree to the same level of joining as employees have. Yeah.
Hi, it was very stimulating. First question is, how do you manage the retention rates? So two people, same level, same salary.
Yep.
One has a better offer, negotiates something higher.
Yeah.
But everyone knows.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
So what happens?
Right. So in a case like that, what we say is that market rate can absolutely play a role in someone's salary, right? And if people are getting actual offers, that's a pretty clear indication of what the market is willing to bear, right? And so for a single individual, if something like that happened and we look at that, we're like, you know what? That does seem like this is a trend. This is what the market rates are. We would actually bump it up for the job level itself. And then everyone who's in that same role family would actually get a bump to go with it. And we did that once in 2022 when kind of the FANG companies were just going wild with engineers. We made an adjustment. We didn't go to the bonkers levels that they're doing, but we were seeing that in general, engineering salaries had gone up a bunch. And so we adjusted it across the board for everyone.
So basically your reaction is when there is an evident trend to raise everyone's salary accordingly. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I don't know that one data point would necessarily be a trend, but it might inform information for a trend. We do use also, what's it called? There's a company that we use also for salary information as well. Yeah, I didn't hear what it was, but there's a couple different ones, right? And so we use one of those as well to help inform market information.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to be like maybe the terrible person in the room, but if you can answer this question, I think it might convince, a lot of other founders or people with in similar situations. So I was given a budget to hire, a few people on our team. We're a very small company, 10 people. I had about 110K, it was for one person. And we interviewed a really good candidate. He was a Chinese immigrant and he asked for 50K. Mm-hmm. So I'm now in a situation where I've got a guy who's willing to take 50K. We didn't do transparent salaries. We actually did hire him. And I now have 60K where we could hire, like a contractor or somebody overseas. Mm-hmm. There's a huge incentive. Like we're trying, we're under a crunch time. We're trying to release games. We're trying to get things out. We're trying to make money. We're a small company. Like on one hand, like you want to do the right thing. You want to make sure everybody's, adequately equipped with, what they need to live. But on the other hand, like that's 60K that can definitely change both myself and the company. Like how do you deal with like the reality of your bottom line versus doing the right thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all this is about is being able to defend the choices that you make, right? This isn't about trying to force, everyone's got to pay a bunch more or things like that. It's really about defending. We've actually, as part of our system, I didn't have time to get into it, we do actually have exceptions that we codify, right? And so for us, what an exception is that someone brings something to the table, for example, that you wouldn't have expected, like an animator who can program and it's valuable and there's a reason why you want it, right? We can make an exception to change their salary at a discretionary level, but we will document that there's a adjustment that happened here and here's the reason why. And we did something like that exactly once and the team was really excited about it, right? So in a case like what you're talking about, if you can defend the choice of why you're making it and make it clear to everyone this is why you made the choice, that would be the bias that I would have for how to address that.
Hello. You did kind of touch on something that I was going to ask with one of the questions, but we can talk about the game industry all we want, but we are a piece of the larger pie with, say, like military simulation and film and all that. How does this sort of transparency work when you're dealing with, say, like a game animator role versus like, oh, here's the transparency on the film animator role? And like, how does that sort of work when you're not only like talking about what you would pay for a programmer for games versus a programmer for like AMD or something?
Right. I mean, these are all factors that go into things like what the market rates are, right? The traditional answer for why do backend engineers get paid the most is because Facebook and other companies will also pay them, right? But they're not necessarily looking for a gameplay programmer. So again, it's all about the justification and actually doing the homework and being upfront and explaining to folks like this is why certain choices are being made. And so that in that case, if different roles are need to be paid higher for various market reasons, we just tell people. That's it. So super sorry, I was just flagged down that we got to stop, but I am going to take more questions and we'll head out over to the Overlook. So thank you, everyone.